Welcome to Unraveling Midlife. I'm your host, Sarah Spence. Thanks for joining me as I explore my own astrological midlife by speaking with all sorts of inspiring people about their life and work. If you're new to the show, welcome. At the end of most episodes, I share a track of my original music, and there's more information about my guest as well as the music in the show notes. Today, you do have some music. But what's astrological midlife? It relates to Western astrology transits that run from the mid-30s to the mid-40s for everyone. Each of the main midlife transits have an overall theme, though details vary by generation and by individual. And today's guest actually comments on some of these. This phase of astrological midlife directly corresponds to that term midlife crisis, though I like to call it the midlife unraveling. But so far, this podcast has been me unraveling my time with these astrology transits with others who've gone through them or are within them, honouring the passage of moving through these interesting times of shake-up. And as I come towards the end of that period, I'm just kind of happy that I've made it through, and I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be talking about these. Well, today we welcome back Mada Dalian. She's an author and teacher who helps others to release deeply held ingrained beliefs and thought forms through her Self-healing Dalian Method. It makes it accessible for us to heal ourselves. This is part of a series about Mada and the method she created, following on from part 1 2 months ago and a panel discussion with some of her students and Dalian Method facilitators last month. In this month's episode, we reference the Self-healing Dalian Method without going into too many details, so I encourage you to listen to part 1, which is episode 46, if you haven't already. There you'll also hear more about her life starting in the former Soviet Union in Armenia and how she ended up on this fascinating journey and living in Western Canada. Here is time with Mada Dalian on our second episode, Talking Together. Mada, welcome back to Unraveling Midlife. It's great to have you here again. Excited for our conversation today.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, last time we covered a bit about you and your life, talked about creativity. We mentioned your 2 books, and one of the notes I made, dropping the ego isn't easy.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. One thing we didn't talk about last time was a little bit on like the theme of my podcast is astrological midlife, and I wondered what happened to you in your late 30s, early 40s, which is that time of astrological midlife. And I mean, there is a sneak peek in your book In Search of the Miraculous, but I wondered if you could, like, was there a big change for you in your life around that time?
Normally, there's certain phases that each one of us goes through. So we call it childhood, being a toddler, then coming up to being a teenager. Then teenager, it's a different space that people go through, different mindset. Then you become a young adult, then you become an adult, and then basically it's like a wave. So the wave goes up and then it starts going down as the body ages. So in the event of what we call midlife is basically almost like that peak of the wave, and then if we take that we have 80-year lifespan, for example, as general, then obviously the peak will be around the 40, and then the wave starts going down. Psychologically, every phase has its own psychological shifts as well. So what people call midlife crisis happens when a person hasn't done any kind of spiritual work during their lifetime. If you do some work trying to find who you are, because that work leads you to understanding that everything is temporary and everything comes and goes. Then it does not become a crisis. It becomes more an easy transition with an awareness that, yeah, this is part of life. This is how things happen. However, most of the time people are very identified with their unfinished, let's say, unfinished relationships, unfinished desires, not having lived their full potential. So, and never having asked the question, who am I? What am I doing here? Where would I go when I die? In other words, awareness of death is absolutely not in the picture. Then it becomes like a crisis because the body automatically, as it ages, starts 40s, suddenly the awareness comes in that, oops, half my life is gone. And then if you're prepared, obviously, you slide through that phase easily. If you're not prepared, then it's going to be a crisis.
Yeah.
So in my case, because I started doing my work very early on and asking the questions, who am I, 5 years old. So for me, it was just an awareness that something shifted in the body, because it does. And the more you are prepared through meditation, through witnessing, through doing your inner work, the more you can notice these changes. So when you notice the change, you just notice it with understanding. Aha, so things are going now, starting now. They're going to go downhill, but it's downhill physically. It's uphill more emotionally, mentally. In the sense that nothing to worry about. It's almost like you become wiser in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you start accepting the changes of life. You start accepting things that you haven't been accepting earlier. Because earlier the ego's there, the desires are there, what's unfulfilled is there, the struggles are there. And if it's, family life, if people have young children, so life is busy. So all these things become create a lot of stress. Now, of course, you now addressing midlife, but there's another transition at 60. There is another transition. So it's almost like every 20 years there's a transition. Because once you start hitting 60, then it becomes more relevant to work or to prepare for the transition. Then you are aware that I am going to die. And if you haven't done your work, all the fears come in, and then the person goes into the Alzheimer's state. I don't remember anything, because that's too painful to know that I'm going to die. So therefore, doing the inner work of self-awareness, self-discovery is absolutely crucial in those times of transition.
Yeah, there's so many times of transition. It reminds me of something I've been meaning to ask you for a while, and I know it's going back to when you're younger, because astrologically there's that midlife time, and then there's the Saturn return at around 29. And I do recall you saying, because we talked about how you can use the Self-healing Dalian method on adults, but the younger you get, it's a different form, a different length of the session to work on kind of sloughing the negative thought forms and emotions that are trapped in the body. So I wondered if that Saturn return phase, because I remember you saying to someone, oh, how old is that person? Oh, they're in their early 20s. They need to use the teen version. So I wondered if that Saturn return 29 was that kind of, in astrology, it's like the move to the adult, and I wondered if it was the same for the Self-healing Dalian method, or does it depend on the person?
It depends. Everything depends on the person. Some teenagers are more advanced, they're more like adults, and some are still even though teenagers, the child is very prominent. Many adults are actually behaving like children, and the older the person gets, the closer to death they come. Suddenly they start behaving like children. So it all depends on the person, and it all depends on what sort of issue they're working with. For example, if it's some sort of a trauma, it's deeply hidden, so might need some extra time to come to transformation. And what is transformation? Transformation means I now see what I haven't been seeing before. I now understand what I haven't been understanding before, and what I've been identified with before, I'm no longer identified with. I'm disidentified. So therefore, I feel my freedom and I feel my strength. That's transformation. And that's basically the purpose of the Dalian method, because that's what it helps you do within a session without having to wait for years, because those transformation points happen for people in those life phases, but you don't want to wait for 20 years to come to a certain understanding and transformation. That's why this system is very, very powerful and could be used by children, teenagers, and adults alike, with different lengths, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that's everything. Everyone's just so different.
Well, because our journeys are different. So nobody can be, and that's another issue in our education system. We try to make everybody like a cookie cutter. Well, competition. Somebody can do this, you can't do this, and then the child starts comparing without understanding that, yes, okay, but I can do something that somebody else cannot do. So, and that's what's missing in our education system. And then the child grows up with those wounds of feeling not good enough, inferior, comparing themselves to others, feeling envious, then starting to lie, undermine, and lose their integrity.
And it's such a journey to get through that. And I'm finding, coming out of astrological midlife, that I feel like I'm finally starting to, and I don't know if it's anything to do with astrological midlife or just the work that I'm doing, that I feel like I'm finally starting to come out of those fears. Did you have those fears yourself?
Well, I had, first of all, at 5 years old, when you face death, when you understand I'm going to die, the world will continue as it was continued when I saw my grandfather's death. So then that understanding almost erases the fear that normally what people have. So then the identification with the ego is identified and is afraid to die. It's basically because you don't know that you don't die. And if you do think you know intellectually, that's not enough.
And that can be a challenge, because you think, because the mind's so, strong.
Well, this is the thing. This identification creates distance between your awareness and your ego. The ego never wants to die, because the function of the ego is to help you survive, to help the body survive. The ego doesn't know about your being, about your spirit. The ego doesn't know that you've lived other lifetimes before you've come to this body.
Yeah.
The ego's function, just like a body has a function, heart has a function. Pumps the energy, the heart pumps, the circulation happens, and the body continues living. So ego has a function, but people think I am the ego, and that's what I call identification. I am the mind, I am my desires, I am what I've been told and programmed and I believed. I am my beliefs, but beliefs are not who you are. So for me, the fear, when I was doing my inner work, meditating, I understood through that meditation, I did face the fear of the ego to disappear. And I had to take a conscious action to say that if I die, I die. Today is a good day to die. And take that jump. Because when people come to that fear, almost like your whole body trembles, because the ego is part of that equation. It's part of the body. So, but when the awareness supersedes, once there's an awareness, oh, now I see I'm not that fear. You still feel it, you have to go through it, but you have to make a decision.
Would you say that's a one-off? Because my experience in working with the Dalian method is that I'll see it during the session and then I get caught up in life and totally identified with the ego again.
It's not an easy work because for many lifetimes you've been identified. And that's why continuous practice of meditation, doing that work of, for example, with the Dalian method, you can transform the mind, the beliefs. It's all beliefs, right? So once you transform the beliefs into awareness, you access your inner consciousness and you transform your fears, fear of making mistakes, fear of basically other people's judgments and opinions, etc., etc. Those are the little fears you transform. And then you come to the main fear, which is the fear to disappear, the fear of the unknown. These things you have to face. And of course, at different age, people can face it differently. And depending on the intensity of your spirit wanting to know who you are.
And it's a challenge. There's a lot of people who are in the self-help kind of seeking space and they hear that the Dalian method works with negative thought forms. They go, oh no, I just want you, they're very addicted to positive affirmations. It's not for the faint-hearted.
That's absolutely correct, because part of what we're developing is courage.
So I'm just thinking about, I mean, you've been working with people and you have a lot of regulars you've been working with for some years. Are there any themes of changes that you've seen with people that you've been working with over the years?
Absolutely. People who have continued and have been dedicated to their own awakening and understanding that it's not a mental process. And people who have been continuing to work with my method, with the meditations, attending all these courses I do twice a year, 5-week, 8-week. I've seen a lot of growth and understanding, and to a point where some of them are really starting to experience what I always talk about, the trembling of the ego to disappear. And with that, then because the understanding is growing as a result of you working on yourself, and of course, like you said, life takes a lot of energy from each person. Your energy goes to work, paying your bills, taking care of your well-being, your food. You have to take showers every day. So a lot of energy goes into maintaining the body. So that's why traditionally in India, or you can say in Christian culture, they had created those ashrams or monasteries where people could just focus on their spiritual work.
Yeah, that's all over the world, really. There was the Christian, the Hindu, Buddhist. Yeah,
that's right. And that's why people have renounced the world, gone into, well, in some sense, I did the same thing. With, I'm sorry about all this texts that are coming in. So in some sense, I let go of my training in architecture. I let go of any kind of worldly desires to have things, you know, to have a house, to have a car, to have this and that. And most of all, people also want to have some prestige because there's so many wounds and insecurities inside. So I left all that and I spent time with my master, Osho, and in his community. So, and of course, my focus was meditation every day. And what we call a Buddha field, it definitely helps. Just like, you know, when you work with the group of people, when we're working through those 8 weeks, you know, or courses, you know that Buddha field energy of other people also doing the work helps you to discipline, gives you that extra cushioning almost from the world.
So is the Buddha field a term used for that ashram where you were?
That's the term used for people, like-minded people coming together doing this work. So it does create that energetic field.
We had a section of a festival that used to be here in New Zealand. It was called Buddha Field, and I only realized the correlation recently. Yeah. And so you said, I know from reading your book that when you spent time at the Osho ashram in Oregon, wasn't it? That's a bit
India as well.
in
I
India
lived
as well.
4
And
years
you
in
really
India.
focused on meditation, because the Osho ashrams are famous for other reasons, for people going and having a lot of sex. But you really focused on the meditation.
That's right. And so when he became famous about the sex guru label, it basically what he was trying to do, he was trying to break that conditioning, the sexual repressions from people. So for me, coming from this is interesting, coming from the background of being born in Soviet Union, there was no religion, there was no repressions. So for me, that wasn't an issue at all. For me, it was more, that's not a problem. So for many people came there because of their repressions, and they had to go through those sexual repressions to transform them. I didn't have to do any of that work. I had no problem with it.
That makes sense.
And for me, so then meditation became absolute focus.
Do you have a favorite Osho meditation?
Kundalini. That's the one I was doing every day. Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah. So when you've got I mean, a lot of people kind of come to you and they find their way through various, generally word of mouth, right? And you've been working with some people for a long time. You must have people that you see once, never see again. Are there a good chunk of people that come just to look for a quick fix? They just want alleviating suffering?
Yes, that's unfortunately that's based on misunderstanding for people, that thinking that, oh, I can just, you know, go to somebody can fix me quickly. But that's not possible because you're living your life. You have your own unconscious to go through and decipher. And it's nobody else's job. It's each person's job to work with their own unconscious. And you can't just throw all your beliefs in one big, you know, goal. It's like wearing so many layers of clothes and suddenly somebody says, well, throw everything. Well, it's not possible. It's just, there's a comfort zone that everybody goes through. And, you know, in relationship, well, I'm not ready. You know, that's a common expression. I'm not ready for something. Well, what does it mean, I'm not ready? It means it's overwhelming, I'm afraid, it's too much, I can't handle it. So all these things, there's that feeling that people have that I can't do, I can't go through this. So, all right, then that's why you need to understand that it's a layer by layer work, and at least start somewhere. Because if you start that work, especially working with my system, it helps to expand your vision, expand your energy, and then you become more and more ready. It's like you put a seed in the ground, it takes time for it to grow, and then the petals open one by one. They don't all open at the same time. So the same way is the inner work, the spiritual work. It's every petal opening creates more space. It takes more freedom, because that freedom of understanding, I don't need to be afraid to be alone. The understanding that only I can live my life. Nobody can dictate how I can live, or nobody can tell me feel this or feel that. Right? Each person feels what they feel. Nobody can force you to feel a certain way. It's like, you can't make anybody love you if they don't love you. Right? So you cannot force anyone. And that's the understanding that no matter how much you try to fill your empty spaces with the presence of other people, those people are going to be there for a little bit and they're going to go. Nobody can be there for you 24/7. They have to live their own life. And those insecurities create a lot of problem for people, because then they manipulate, they start compromising their inner truth, etc., etc. So part of the work is to get stronger, to understand why you're compromising, why you're not being truthful to yourself and others. That's all part of inner work. And that slowly you get in touch with your strength. And that's the absolute necessity. Without inner strength, you cannot take the courage to go into the dark tunnel of your unconscious. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's so much here. And a lot of what you've been talking about is in your book, In Search of the Miraculous, in many different ways. And I wonder if we leave it here as a ... for our next episode, because there's some stuff that I'd like to get in with you there.
Absolutely.
Great. Yes. Okay. So everyone remember, we've got Mada's website, www.madadalian.com, and it's in the show notes. And if you missed part 1, you can go and do a catch up, and we'll be looking forward to part 3. Thanks, Mada.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to the music section of the show. Today's music is from a live performance at Wallace Arts Trust in Auckland, New Zealand, with a song that I wrote immediately after doing a Self-healing Dalian Method session as part of Mada's 8-week course in January 2022. This song actually holds the record as the only time I've repeated a song on this podcast, but I find it incredibly uplifting, and you can hear that my audience at this live performance felt so too. It's also got a special spot in my heart because it features my dad. His voice is the strong baritone in the audience. Here is I Feel Joy. You ready, Dad? You going to sing with me?
I feel joy.
Dad feels joy. That's great. It's called I Feel Joy. I feel joy, I feel joy, I feel joy within my soul. I feel joy, I feel joy, I feel joy within my soul. Let's do it together. I feel joy, I feel joy, I feel joy within my soul. I feel joy, I feel joy, I feel joy within Unraveling Midlife is brought to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand by www.sarahmarlowspence.com. Theme music is by Sarah Marlowe Spence and Saraswati Marie Willis, and art by Samantha Hepburn.